youth, young person, the very phrase creates different images for each of us, contrasting images such as those seen just 2 years ago in the riots that swept across the nation, images that threaten to change the way we see our young people forever. However, this view would be transformed by just one event, only 12 months later, the 2012 Olympics, where up and down the country, people young and old would be seen working side by side to create one of the best games ever seen. And that view of that raging inferno, which became so iconic as the image of the riot, would be transformed into one of raging sun and ravishing smiles. Without realizing it, our ideas and preconceptions misguide us. But what if that changed? I've held the hand of your daughter as she thought she was having a miscarriage, cared for your 2-week-old baby after you accidentally burnt them, gave your father a hand up after he fell in the middle of the night. But I'm a young person. No two people are alike. No two people's stories are the same. Amidst the monotonous stereotypes, there are real people making a real difference, not only in their lives, but in the lives of the people in their community. I'd like to invite you on a journey across sacred mountains, countries and continents, all with one thing in common, the tenacity of those who dare to believe. In order to understand this journey, we must go back to the very start, Port Elizabeth, South Africa. I was raised in a family where I was taught that I could achieve anything, that with enough hard work and determination, I could achieve the impossible. But as I grew up, I began to realize this wasn't the case for everyone, that young people were growing up believing that they would never have the skills or the ability to be successful, that they were doomed to some kind of dull and monotonous life. And this couldn't be further from the truth. Throughout this journey, I'll examine just a few stories of a couple of young people whose lives have not only changed their communities, but young people whose lives have ultimately altered the course of others. In 2000, my family was struck by the tragic death of my brother. Following flash floods, rescuers began to search for survivors, and when the rescuers finally got to my brother, he turned them away so that they could help someone else before him. When they returned, he was gone. I never knew if this was true or not, or just something that an 8-year-old version of me conjured up amidst the chaos in order to try and cope. But ultimately, I never wanted to know if it was true, because without any shadow of a doubt, that moment changed my life. Over the following years, I began to wonder what impact my life would have on the world, what impact my life would have on others. I thought that if someone in their time of ultimate need, after hours of battling raging floodwaters, could look up and see the needs of someone else and put that before their own, then I really need to consider what I'm doing with my life. Thomas Wolfe said that we are the sum of all the moments in our lives, and that moment changed everything in mine. It changed the career I wanted to go into, motivated me to work harder, and ensured that I would just make at least a small difference. Since that day, I've lived with the sole aim of making even just half the difference my brother did, because if I could do that, then I would have achieved something. This really became a reality after we moved to the UK and I lost all trace of an accent and I joined the Red Cross. I began to realize the incredible young people that are everywhere around us, young people who give of their time, not for fame or gain, but in order to be the one in their community who stands up in a time of crisis and says, I'll do it. Or the young person who makes a difference in someone else's lives. I was even more privileged to work with the young people that we came into contact with, young people that society had often written off, young people who were young offenders, that used a variety of substances, young people who weren't in educational training, young people that society called troublemakers, to the point where one lady expressed sheer amazement at the fact that such a young person could even go into those environments. Little did she know that I could see no difference between those young people and myself. We all had the same ability, the same potential, just our circumstances were a bit different. Our young people face challenges that some of us could never ever begin to imagine. One day, teaching at a pupil referral unit, a young girl approached her teacher, and she told her teacher the reason she was so small and underdeveloped for her age wasn't because of anything else, other than the fact that her mother wouldn't feed her and she wanted it to stop. For those of you who don't know, a pupil referral unit is somewhere where people who can't go into mainstream education or excluded from mainstream education go to receive some form of education. And during that very same break, another teacher came up to me and she told me how she had never seen one of her young people pay attention like he was doing that day, how he was normally easily distracted and could barely pay attention, but on that day, he was paying attention like she had never seen before. And I'd heard in other institutions how these young people would never achieve anything, how getting a GCSE in maths or English would be an achievement for these young people. And a while later, I heard from this boy's teacher, and she told me that he now wanted to become a paramedic because after learning just some basic first aid, he found something that he enjoyed, something that he wanted to do, and as a result, he was going to try and get his GCSEs. Now, that wasn't down to my teaching, not at all. That was down to that young person finding something that he enjoyed, something that he dared to believe that he could do. I briefly want to mention the place of physical disability amongst our young people. And in order to do that, we must travel back to that sacred mountain, which we mentioned at the very start. While on deployment in Zimbabwe, we were lucky enough to be taken to see a sacred mountain. And while barely a slope, well, barely a climb, more of a slope, the fact that I'm injury prone and all the activities over the previous days meant that as I climbed up, I began to feel the burn. And I looked back and saw a friend of mine climbing up on just his crutches. He had a single above the knee amputation. And I recalled how over the previous days, he had thrown himself into every single activity, ran until he fell down, and when he fell, just picked himself back up again, smiled, and tried once more. When eventually he got to the top, he just simply raised his crutches in the air, balanced on his one leg, and smiled. The determination and good nature of that young person stands testament to how each of us can absolutely destroy any challenge that faces us in our lives. In Serbia, working with young people in the Serbian Red Cross, I saw how they would train almost every single day to be ready for any disaster that would come. And a while later, I saw those very young people responding to an earthquake that shook the country shortly before 2 a.m. in 2010. Gandhi said that we must become the change we wish to see in the world, with so much potential hidden in the places that people couldn't even possibly imagine. We have the responsibility to ensure everyone gets their chance to find that thing that makes them dare to believe, that small gesture that makes them dare to believe that they can achieve the impossible. I'd like to leave you with one final thought. Henry Ford said, "The man who thinks he can and the man who thinks he can't are often both right." Thank you.